Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt in Studio West, joined by Matt Continetti. Matt is the Director of Domestic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. He is a columnist for the Washington Free Beacon. He is the Washington editor for Commentary Magazine, and I hear him most days on the Commentary podcast. Hello, Matt. Thank you for joining me on this Friday. Always good to see you.
Always good to see you, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
I listened with great interest yesterday as you opined on Yalta. John Podhoretz reminded me you are a historian. Your book, The Right, is fabulous. So I'm going to throw a historian's question at you to open this up.
Okay.
Trump is to Zelensky as FDR was to blank.
Well, I mean, the easiest answer would be Churchill.
Nope.
I'm not sure.
Nope.
No? Okay.
De Gaulle. A troublesome
Gaulle.
and necessary person with whom you have to deal, but who gives you heartburn at every turn. And more for Churchill than FDR. But what do you make of this?
Yes. Well, it's a fascinating development, Hugh. I think the relations breakdown between Washington and Ukraine over the past week illustrates is the personalist aspect to Donald Trump's foreign policy. The more we learn about what's happened over the past few days, the more we begin to understand that Zelensky made some critical errors, I think, in dealing with the United States and more specifically with the Trump administration. It seems that he rejected out of hand this resource deal that the Trump administration first presented to him in the person of Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And then he subsequently rejected it in meetings with Marco Rubio and JD Vance during the Munich conference. Then he rejected it publicly. And then when Rubio, Waltz, and Steve Witkoff, the special envoy, met with Sergei Lavrov last week in Riyadh, or even earlier this week, it's all coming together, time's a flat circle. Zelensky responded to Trump's criticism as saying Trump lives in a disinformation space. If you know anything about Donald Trump, you know that if you attack him, he's going to attack you back. And so I think these decisions led to what we saw in the breakdown in relationships. But in the past 12 hours, Hugh, I think we now have a chance of reestablishing the relationship under a revised resource agreement that seems to have been worked out through the special envoy, another special envoy, Keith Kellogg, with Zelensky. And that's what our national security advisor, Mike Waltz, spoke to yesterday and again today. So when I look at Zelensky, I think he needs to understand how to deal with Donald Trump. He doesn't have much practice with it, right? And he came in. We, of course, had the 2019 perfect phone call. Then we had the pandemic. Then there was 4 years of Trump out of power. The war begins, this latest stage of the war begins in 2022 with Joe Biden in office. I don't think Zelensky has much experience with Trump and the Maga movement and the way it's developed in recent years. And I was remember, Hugh, in September when Zelensky visited the munitions factory in Pennsylvania in the middle of the general election campaign alongside the Democratic governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and the Democratic congressman in Pennsylvania's 8th district, then Matt Cartwright. Well, Cartwright lost. He lost to a Republican. And Trump won Pennsylvania. And so I think that Zelensky needs to understand that he's dealing in separate circumstances. He's dealing with Donald Trump now, and he needs to learn how to operate and speak Trump in a way he hasn't before.
Yeah, I've got a lot of experience with that, Matt. And I also have a couple of Trump tattoos, having interviewed him 30 times in public, on public. And you get Trump tattoos, and you learn how to do it to the benefit of both parties. And I really don't know who's advising Zelensky, but because to take to X to criticize your client, and they are our client. I mean, we give them the money. We give them the arms. I was astonished by the naivete, and I think there are a lot of people in American media, certainly the Democratic Party, who would rather see Trump fail than a ceasefire that is stable succeed. Do you agree with me?
Well, I agree that this war in Ukraine has been politicized from the start, Hugh. I think that one reason President Biden was so slow to deliver the weapon systems that Ukraine needed at critical points in the war was because Biden and the Democratic Party thought that they could divide the Republican Party over support for Ukraine. And that political calculation did not work out in Biden's advantage. And my reference to the congressman who lost last year is a part of a broader pattern. And I think we're going to see that in the coming German elections as well.
Oh, Schultz is going to get wiped
Ukraine,
out.
Exactly. Governments that support Ukraine don't do well, and Zelensky needs to understand that.
I think you said on commentary yesterday, or maybe Abe did, he overpromises and underdelivers. I still want him to win, and I still think he's a brave and courageous leader. But you can't do that to your allies, especially to your patrons. I'll be right back with Matt Continetti during the break, and he'll be back, of course, because it's Friday and we're lucky. Matt Continetti in the house. All right, I've got 5 minutes with Matt during the break here. I want to play for you, Matt, something Marco Rubio said to Catherine Herridge today in a lengthy interview at the State Department, cut number 3.
If I can just jump in, what I'm hearing you say is that in the last 4 years, there's been a breakdown in communication with China and also Russia.
Well, interestingly enough, the communication with China has actually been better than the communication with the Russians under the Biden administration and to the current day, which is why that there has to be some level of maturity here and practicality and pragmatism when it comes to foreign policy. That said, we're not going to live in a world where we depend on China for critical rare earth minerals, for critical components in our supply chain. We're not going to live in a world in which China gets to dominate the Indo-Pacific, and we're not allowed to have commercial ties in that region because they're holding countries hostage, and they all become tributary states. The Japanese have no interest in being a tributary state, and they're close allies of ours. The South Koreans, the Philippines, Australia. None of these countries want to become tributary states. Vietnam, for that matter, are not interested in becoming sort of tributary states in a Chinese zone of influence.
Matt, what did you hear or not hear there?
Well, I heard that we might be looking for some type of deal with China in the coming months, but I also heard from Secretary Rubio that we need to understand that we can't exist in a dependency with China, that there are certain things that America has to be able to produce on its own. And look, we lived through this before during the pandemic when we had
wait,
the crisis
Matt, I
with
want
masks.
to redirect you for a moment. I think it was an Atchison moment because I didn't hear Taiwan. I heard Japan, Australia, Philippines, even Vietnam, South Korea, no Taiwan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is a part maybe of this deal that's being speculated about inside Washington and inside the Trump administration. So again, it's part of this larger condominium that I think that the Trump administration may be pursuing with China. And that, of course, we also have to remember, though, Hugh, he might not have mentioned Taiwan there, but then we had this episode of the language on Taiwan being changed on the State Department website, where the secretary seems to have removed the language saying that the United States does not support Taiwan independence and replacing it with language saying that we oppose any forceful resolution to the conflict. So we're getting some mixed messages on Taiwan as we are in Ukraine.
And that's very dangerous, isn't it? We have a minute till we come back. It's very dangerous to be unclear about
Taiwan. It's absolutely dangerous. You mentioned Dean Acheson. And that was, of course, as you know, was when Acheson failed to include the South Korea in America's defense perimeter in East Asia. We faced the invasion from North Korea a few months later in the beginning of that terrible conflict from 1950 to 1953.
Stalin heard that, as did Kim Jong-un's grandfather. I'll be right back with Matt Continetti. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt in Studio West. Matt Continetti is with me. Follow him on X. Matt, as you mentioned, we have shuttles diplomacy going on. We've got a couple of special envoys in Witkoff and Kellogg. We've got the Vice President, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor. We've got John Ratcliffe in some of these meetings from the CIA. And soon we'll have Kash Patel in some of these things. Susie Wiles is off to the side, and the president's calling all the shots. I have 4 sides to my square. Russia, Putin is evil, but Russia is a great power. We can't defeat it. Hamas is evil, and it has to be destroyed. Iran is evil, and it could be defeated. And China is our greatest adversary, and the best we can do is deter them. Everything I have to make work within that box. Is that an appropriate structure to try and understand all this stuff going on?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it speaks to the complexity and chaos of the world that President Trump inherited. I mean, this was not the case when he left office, that you could talk about all these manifold threats and all these challenges. And now his new administration has to face them all at once. And the second thing I take from your image, your very powerful image of the box there, Hugh, is you can't isolate any of these things. You're going to have to tackle them all at once, and they're interrelated, right? Iran is supplying weapons to Russia that Russia then uses in Ukraine, and China is supplying Russia with finance, with energy, with technology, and Hamas, of course, is a dependency of Iran and related to Iran's malign behavior throughout the Middle East. So you have to understand not only that there are many challenges and crises facing this administration, but also that they are interrelated. And if the end game, if the end result is one that empowers China or Russia, even if we say assist or allow the Israelis to take out the Iranian nuclear program, we would still be living in a dangerous world, perhaps a less dangerous world for sure, but there would still be dangers that remained.
On the commentary podcast this morning, perhaps the most somber since 10/8/23, in the aftermath of the return of the Bibas children, but not their mother, and the identification of the method of death that it's been made by the Israelis, Jonathan Shanzer laid out that there are three options going forward. One of them is that after Saturday and the return of 6 hostages, Netanyahu takes off the gloves and America bares its teeth. Do you think that's what's going to happen?
Well, I think it's what should happen. I think it's what Hamas deserves. And I think after the experience of the past few days and just the horrible images and just the visceral feelings, I would say that we should support that wholeheartedly if Israel decides to take the gloves off and resume the war and continue to fight Hamas to the finish. I wonder whether there will be some pressure, though, to engage in some type of phase 2 negotiations, even if I really believe that the reaction in Israel to the Bibas family is so strong that I think the desire to take the fight to Hamas may be more powerful in this moment than the desire to see the remaining hostages released.
You know, Jonathan Shanzer again made the point on commentary this morning that the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is probably the most important meeting between a prime minister of Israel and a president of the United States since the founding of the State of Israel. I agree with him. What do you think they agreed on?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, it's clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu likes the Trump proposal for the post-war Gaza settlement. It's an out-of-the-box proposal. It's one that challenges the other nations in the region, especially the Arab nations, to come up with their own proposals. And I do think there's a reaction to the Bibas family and the death of these children, these babies, that says, look, the two-state solution is clearly dead. But this idea of not making it possible for Hamas to ever come back to Gaza should be a real one, and we should consider that. And it also makes it much harder to distinguish who is Hamas and who is not. When you see these crowds cheering a coffin parade, I mean, what kind of civilization or culture produces such ghastly imagery, such horrific, disgusting images? So I think that the two figures, Trump and Netanyahu, are on the same page that Hamas has to go, that there can be no future in Gaza with Hamas. The question is, how do we get there? What are the means we use to reach that endpoint? And it's not so clear to me that they agree totally on the means, even if they agree on the ends.
Now, Matt, I want to switch to intellectual history, and we'll talk during the break, and we'll come back for a minute afterwards. You are the author of The Right, so you've done a lot of work on the evolution of the right. I'm a Nixonian guy, and RN used to say over and over again, You got to have Goldwater's people. You can't win without them, but you can't win just with them. Is that true about the Maga people who are not the Goldwater people? There might be a little overlap. It's a different coalition, and I really don't have a good handle on how to define it. They like to call me the Uniparty or GOPE, and I don't know what they call you, probably a neocon. But how do we define MAGA?
Well, it's hard. I mean, some people define MAGA just as the Trump coalition, but then there's another definition, which is MAGA are the voters that have been with Trump from the beginning and who stuck with him during his political exile after January 6th up through his winning the nomination in 2024. And I think the other important thing to recognize about 2024 is you had both of those groups of MAGA. So you had the people who were with him from the beginning, who stuck with him during Biden's term when he was the subject of the lawfare, when all the investigations, he was in Mar-a-Lago. But you also had a lot of new people come in 2024, and these are the low propensity voters that Trump was able to bring into his coalition. And they've kind of joined MAGA as well. And I think they're not necessarily political people. They're not necessarily ideological people, but they were certainly anti-Biden and anti-Harris. They wanted change, and they believe Trump can bring change and not only restore the economy of his first term, bring some type of order in the world, but also get rid of all this wokeness, which drove everybody crazy.
I'm going to talk with Matt during the break. He'll come back for one more brief segment at the other side. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm back with Matt Continetti. Matt, I can do this because we're not on air, and we'll put it on YouTube later. I'll be on special reports of the panel tonight. It's Friday, so we do a winner and loser of the week. My loser is Olaf Scholz because you're going to get wiped out on Sunday. But my winner is Vice President Vance because he has demonstrated, what did Adam say of Jefferson, a peculiar felicity of expression. He did it in Europe. He's doing it online. He did it at CPAC. Where does the vice president fit in the MAGA movement? And do you anticipate down the road a collision between, let's call it, the Cotton wing, the Youngkin wing, and the Vance wings of the GOP? They're different.
Yeah, they are different. They're different wings. But right now, the Trump-Vance wing is in command. And I don't think the other wings are interested in challenging Trump and Vance. I have to say, Hugh, you and I are always thinking alike. JD Vance's appearance at CPAC was the third public appearance in a row where I was just frankly bedazzled by his ability to communicate. It was the AI speech last week, then it was the Munich speech. And now we have the CPAC interview where he talked about the domestic politics, he talked about foreign policy, he talked about his religion, he talked about what it means to be a man in 21st century America, all of it fluently, all of it in a way that was accessible but also non-threatening, charming. He talked about his wife, his family. And I have to say, this is a political star. And not just a political star that we kind of saw when Trump made him his VP last summer, and he was already known as the hillbilly elegy guy, the guy that Ron Howard had made the movie about. But now he's become something else. He's clearly the clearest articulator of what it means to belong to MAGA, what it means to be a Trump supporter. And I think that's going to carry him far in the years ahead.
I agree with that. We're going to come back. I want to ask you one more question about the vice president. Stand by. Matt Continetti, I'll be right back. Welcome back, America. Matt Continetti is with me for 2 more minutes. Matt, we're talking about Vice President Vance. What risks does he run politically? Because I think he's in MAGA, but not of it. I think he's his own person. I know Springfield. I know Ohio. I've known the senator for a while, not very well, but long. He's not originally MAGA. He's very Vancian. What risks is he running right now?
Well, and I say this just on pure political terms, any vice president is connected to his boss. He's connected to the incumbent. And so if JD Vance wants to run for president in 2028, he certainly wants Donald Trump's endorsement in any nomination process because that would almost guarantee him the nomination. But he also wants the country to be in a good condition. He wants people to be satisfied with the economy. He wants people to think that crime is down, that social indicators are up. He wants the world to be in a stable place. And when I look at kind of what this administration is doing in the first month, I think they've actually done a very good job on their domestic priorities. I think Doge is running wild in the federal bureaucracy, but that's a good thing. Sometimes that type of disruption is a good thing. I think the border has been so successful, 90% drop in illegal crossings, that the media won't even talk about it, right? But that's the number 2 issue in the 2024 election. I think inflation is going to take longer because, of course, it's hard to beat out inflation. But what Trump is doing on energy and in budget cutting and in tax policy will eventually get prices under control. What I worry about, Hugh, is foreign policy. Second-term presidents tend to throw the long ball on foreign policy, and it doesn't always work. We think of it in terms of overextension in previous presidencies, but you know what? There's a danger in withdrawal as well. There's a danger in kind of restraint as well, as paradoxical as that might seem. And so if I'm JD Vance, or if I'm advising JD Vance, I'd just say, look, you are tied to this presidency, and so you want to make it the most successful presidency possible in order to set you up down the line.
And I would add to that, watch Israel, keep Israel's back, because whether or not there's an anti-Israel element in Maga, it's not very big. Matt Continetti, good to talk to you. Follow Matt at Continetti on X. Follow me to the next hour.